Hello, my beautiful souls. Welcome back for today's video. Oh, goodness. Dog hair in the coffee. Story of my life. Anywho, today we are moving into the element of air with the swords for our 78 deep challenge / course experience. If you have no idea what I'm talking about and you just clicked on this video, I, Leanna Aligned, am running a tarot challenge and a tarot course side by side. You can choose to participate either way. And we are moving through all 78 tarot cards, one element at a time. Right now we are on the element of air, which is our third element, but you are welcome to jump in at any time. I will leave the links down below for you. And if you've either just found this or watching on the sidelines, when we enter into a new element is always a perfect time to jump in, and you can just circle back around, to the other ones when you get a chance. So let's talk about where we're at. I've been enjoying starting these videos with a little bit of a recap of the previous element. And water was a blur. If I'm being honest, we actually entered into the element of water studies while I was halfway across the country in another state visiting my husband's mother. And I actually did all of those posts ahead of time. So if you don't know, in the course, I do a post for every single card talking about the story of the card, the theme of the card, the meaning of the card as I see it, and then I share as well my personal reflections that have to do with, the Hermit voyage journey that we're all on together. And even though I did those posts in advance, I was still very much aware of the card of the day. I was posting the picture of the card each day, finding it in my deck, and just privately kind of musing on the card as I moved throughout, that community vacation space there. And then when I got home, I didn't have time to really gather my bearings before we had a huge winter storm that knocked out the power, which really activated the water within me because it left me in this place of not being able to get those posts up for my course members, like on the correct time, because I didn't have access to Wi-Fi and our service got knocked out as well. And that was out for 4 or 5 days. So finally now getting back into the rhythm of water and just like kind of becoming more stabilized within that really turbulent, like moving through this element. As you hear me speaking, right, I had a very turbulent experience with this element and just like learning how to navigate this voyage through all of these just really crazy happenings. And it's been fun, it's been challenging, it's been frustrating and enlightening and nourishing all at the same time. So appropriate that the water element happened with all the feels, right? And one thing to note when we were going through the water cards is that on the day of the new moon, which also happened to be the solar eclipse, the card of the day was the moon card. And I got a lot of messages from you being like, wow, like mind blown. Because if you know about this challenge, you know that I divided the cards into the 4 elements and then I shuffled. In whatever random order they were shuffled into is the order that we're moving through them in. So the fact that the moon card landed not only on a moon phase, right, but it landed on the new moon during a very big, astrological event, the solar eclipse, was really, really cool and very synchronistic and affirming for some of you who are just getting into tarot and who felt like you weren't quite sure if this was a thing, right? If there was anything to the mystery of the aspect of tarot. And it was so beautiful to get those messages. And I just wanted to say, even though I am 100% invested, right? I read tarot in a spiritual way. I am by no means doubting the connection that we experience through the tarot. When things like that happen, it still blows my mind because it's just like the synchronicity of it all, right? And you think me just shuffling and then feeling like, okay, this is where we stop, and like here's how all the cards are laid out. You're like, the odds still feel astronomical, and it's so magical, right? It's so magical. So the water element has just been so beautiful. Touched on the intuition. We did the turbulent thing as I talked about. Like, it's been great. And as we're moving into air, I'm filming this a few days in advance, and I'm already feeling that shift. And I'm really being called to share for this element the aspect of tarot as a tool of story. And I'm going to talk more about what that means. Let's look at our last card from the water suit and our first card from the air suit, because you'll know that I kind of use these as navigators. I see the first card of our element as the guide that came forward kind of for the element. And for water, it was the Five of Cups, which was really feeling and honoring our emotions, right? And as we're moving into the swords, into the air, we have the Three of Swords. And we're going to talk about that in just a moment. But if we look at our final Cups card, this would have been the card for yesterday if you're watching this in real time. We have the Six of Cups. And the Six of Cups is, in a way, a card of story itself, because the Six of Cups represents nostalgia. It represents memories. It can represent childhood and children in that playful spirit. And if we zoom out and look at it in a bigger cosmic lens, it can represent past lives and ancestral ties and karmic lessons. So it's a very big card with a lot of theme around story, right? We think about child, we think about memories, and what we do when we experience a memory is we're experiencing our version of the story of whatever it is that we're remembering, right? And we experience it through an emotional lens, right? An intuitive lens in the cups. When we then transition to air, we're really beginning to activate more of that story, because if we look at the element of air deals with the mind, with intellect, with thinking, with communication. And when we think about, right, the mind and communication, what comes up is story, right? We tell ourselves certain stories, we tell others certain stories, we communicate through story. If you think about the way that information was passed down, right, before we really started reading and writing, of course we had art and all of those things, but a lot of traditions, a lot of stories, a lot of the understanding and viewpoints, right, the way that people think about the world was passed by speaking story, by telling story, by communicating themes. And in themes and myths, right, there are deeper spiritual stories hidden. But in order to receive those deeper spiritual stories, we need to use our mind, right, to be philosophical, to think and to make connections. So as we move through the element of air through the sword suit, I really invite you, if it feels aligned, to look at these cards through the lens of story. And if you're in a place to do shadow work, this is going to be an amazing suit for this, because our shadow is all about stories and the stories that we tell ourselves and what we make things mean, right? Which is what the Three of Swords is all about. And I really want to take my time talking about this element and going through this idea with you, because as we enter into the swords, this is going to be a very intense takeoff. The orchestration of the powers that be, however you see the way that tarot works, right? We just talked about the synchronicity with the moon card, so I'm going to trust that this is the right order. But most of the difficult cards in this suit are front loaded in the beginning. They're all like in a line after each other. So let's first talk about the Three of Swords, and then we'll talk about kind of those front loaded, more difficult cards. And we'll go through the order as always. So with the Three of Swords, a lot of people have a hard time understanding this card, especially when we're thinking about the elements, right? Because if we look at the cups as being emotion and the swords as being intellect, a lot of people associate the Three of Swords with heartbreak. And when you think about it, you think of heartbreak as being an emotion, right? So that doesn't make any sense that it would be in the air element. Now, let's talk about the difference between the cups and the swords and the way that this plays out. We started essentially with the heartbreak card, right? We started with the card of grief, the Five of Cups. And as I look for it here, in the Five of Cups, it's very much about feeling your grief. It's about feeling the loss and really being in the emotion of that experience. When we look at the Three of Swords, we can see the drama of it, right? This Five of Cups is more subtle. It almost doesn't feel quite real, which can kind of speak to the idea of loss and grief at times, right? When we're looking at the Three of Swords and the dramatic, like, sword through the heart, which is very much so alive within this particular depiction in this card, there's almost this theatrical drama to it, right? And what I'm about to say is not to discredit the feelings of anyone. This is not to invalidate any feelings. This is just a way of looking at some particular ways to view some of these scenarios that make sense with the Three of Swords and how this aspect of story helps us to move through the swords and move through these emotions in a healthy way. Just wanted to preface that. When we think of the Five of Cups and we think of loss and grief, right, we're thinking of really big, like, let's say, for instance, the passing of a loved one or the passing of a loved pet. That's something we all have to deal with, right? That's a part of life. That can feel like your heart is broken, right? And that emotion is very real. When we look at heartbreak through the Three of Swords, while the emotions in the moment of the heartbreak are no less real than they are in the Five of Cups, there's also this aspect of story and theatrics that come with it, right? If you think back to any experience as a teenager that felt and was very real at that moment as an experience of, like, your world is coming to an end, like you're consumed by this emotion, maybe your parents didn't let you go out with your friends, or you're heartbroken, your first boyfriend of 3 weeks in kindergarten broke up with you or whatever. it feels like the end of the world. It's very dramatic. Like there's theatrics, there's crying, there's emo music, there's that almost playful way of processing the emotion and the story of what we're making that scenario or that emotion mean. And when done in a healthy way, this is beneficial, right? But if we stay stuck in that story, we're unable to move forward. So to me personally, and please feel free to create your own interpretation of the Three of Swords. There's so many beautiful ways to interpret the story of tarot. But the way that I see it is that the Three of Swords is that teenage angst, that dramatic story, that outpouring of over-the-top emotion that we use to have things make meaning, to make meaning of things, to have events in our life that we feel this unexplicable, fleeting pain for. We allow it to be a mountain. We allow ourselves to make a molehill into a mountain, and then we kind of move on. In the end, it wasn't that big of a deal. However, if we stay stuck, as I mentioned, in that mountain, it can be hard to move forward. So with anything, there's a shadow side to this card, but I see this as a fun invitation to explore the stories and to come at the stories of these seemingly big things, right? These fleeting problems that are seemingly big at the moment in a playful way in order to process them. And that is the guide that we're moving through the swords with. So let's talk about the next card. One of my favorites, I'm not going to lie, the Ten of Swords. And I just want to take a moment to lay out the rest of these swords here. So give me a second. Okay, so next we have the Ten of Swords. And the Ten of Swords is that moment where I almost call it a mental death, right? You have so much built up in your mind that you just can't handle it anymore, and it has to come to an end. And when we talk about the 8 and the 9, it makes sense in succession, because the 8 is the card that my beautiful mentor, Racine, Owl Moon 513 here on YouTube. And if you enjoy tarot and you don't know her, please go listen. I've gotten several readings from her and attended a lot of her witchy Sabbath circles. And she refers to this card as the skull fucking yourself card. And I think that's so appropriate, because the 8 really speaks to this idea that we are so closed off in our head and just thinking so many thoughts. Like, this is ruminating. It's like that doomsday thinking, that overanalyzing. We trap ourselves in our brain, going around and around and around with things. So much so that it manifests in the 9, which is a card of anxiety and thought-induced depression, where we're just so, again, in that energy in our own head, thinking all of these unhelpful thoughts, that it keeps us up at night. So then when we get to the 10, right, there's this element of kind of this raining down of all the things you've been thinking, right? In almost a collapse and an ending. And we can choose to let the swords, right, bring about an ending for us, or we can bring about an ending for them. But either way, it is the completion. And there's almost a sense of relief with the Ten of Swords, right? If we think about the graduation of the Three of Swords, moving through and all the angst that's built up throughout the swords suit, to get to the 10 and then be like, like you feel that sense of mental death, of mental release and relief because it's over and we're going to leave it behind. So that's the 10. We talked about the 8. We talked about the 9. We have justice here in the beginning as well. And justice can be one of those complicated cards because the justice card asks us to speak our truth. And part of the element of truth is the other side of that, right? Is untruth, it's lying, it's sneaky, it's deceiving, it's trickster energy, which we see in the 7 of Swords. That doesn't come up till the end of the month. But we see that in the 7 of Swords. There's this balancing of the scales that needs to happen. And when we think about justice, right, we can't explain justice without explaining story. Like there's no way to remove story from the justice card because what is true, what is right, quote unquote right, what is balanced, what is just, is all in the eye of the perceiver, right? And the way that we even move through the justice system, let's take a step back and pretend it's not broken for a moment, right? The way that we move through the justice system here in the US is you go on trial and your peers come and both parties tell their story of the events. And based on those stories and the interpretation of the stories by your peers determines what justice is served. So all really interesting concepts to move through, to play with here. And then we end with the 4 of Swords at 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. So almost a full week in, we then arrive to this 4 of Swords, which is rest. It is where you take a step back. You say, okay, I'm in the 8 of Swords energy. I'm in the 9 of Swords energy. I'm overthinking this. I'm ruminating. I'm stuck. Right? So I'm going to take a step back. I'm going to let my brain shut off and I'm going to rest. This could be actually resting, like sleeping, right? Or this could be unplugging or distracting yourself with another activity, going out with friends, like whatever that 4 of Swords energy is, taking a rest from all of that. So as we move through this energy, right? Working with this energy of story, my invitation to you, if it feels aligned, is to not get so wrapped up in what does this card mean for me today, but rather taking time to understand the story of each card. What is the story of the 3 of Swords? What is the story of the 10? What is the story of justice? What is the story of the 2 of Swords? Because as we enter into the air element, if we want to work with shadow work, we're going to go back to the water and we're going to be in our emotions and we're going to use the story to help us process emotions and move energy, which is an option. And I will talk about that in our course. But if we're just focusing on learning the cards, right, on studying the cards, on learning the stories, when we go to do that other work, knowing the story is going to help us process it from a more removed sense, right? From this kind of 4 of Swords energy. When we do shadow work, it's really important to not be in the heat of the emotional moment so that we don't go into this 3 of Swords, 8, 9 of Swords energy where we're overthinking and we're trapped and we have that like rumination doomsday, because that can actually make things worse, right? But when we understand the story of tarot, and the story goes beyond the swords, right? There's a story in each card. But when we understand the story of each tarot card, it helps us to in times like that, in times of really intense, emotionally activated readings, to remove ourselves and understand it from an outsider's perspective of, okay, what is the undercurrent energy of this story? Like, what is playing out? What is the story of what is playing out? And I'm really going to dive more into, I think, this aspect of story within tarot and actually begin teaching it a little more, because to me, this is really what tarot is. Tarot is 78 little stories. And as I talked about in the beginning, stories help us make meaning out of things. And depending on who's telling the story or where that person is in their life or what their experiences are, changes the way that the story is told. The theme of the story may be the same, but the idea changes. So like I said, I'm going to be talking more about that. And we're going to be going into that within our lesson within the course, where I talk about shadow work and dealing with story within the tarot, and that will come out within this air element. But yeah, my loves, so let's talk about the dates real quick in case you are not in the course and you don't have the calendar printouts and you want to know. So today we're starting April 15th, Monday, with Three of Swords, and we move through the swords until May 3rd, which is a Friday. So we end the swords with the Magician. And we move through in this order: Three of Swords, 10 of Swords, 8 of Swords, Justice, 9 of Swords, 4 of Swords, Queen of Swords, 5 of Swords, Knight, Fool, Star, Lovers, Page, Ace, 6, 2, King, 7, and again ending with the Magician. And I will leave those both in the email and then the description box for you. But if you are in the course, you have all the printables and things, so you don't need any of that. But that, my loves, is the introduction to the air element. I hope that you found this video helpful. I hope that you're still enjoying the challenge, and that if you're just finding us, that you're ready to go ahead and dive in, and that you join us. Again, all those information and links will be down in the description box below for you, and you can visit my website anytime to learn more information about that. But my loves, that is it for me today. Enjoy your stories. I can't wait to see what comes up with this. And with all that being said, I will see you in my next video. Take care, my loves.